Check. We are live. It's Infinite Plane Saturnday for 4/4/2026, which, by the way, is Heath Ledger's birthday. If you recall, Donald Trump was on trial on 4/4 after a week in which he was consistently compared to Jesus by people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Even the Saturday Night Live skit had Trump as Christ. But on 4/4, he goes in comparing himself to Christ. In fact, afterward, he even had his suit chopped up into 47 pieces to be auctioned off, which made me think about the Stations of the Cross where Christ has his clothes stripped and then gambled for. So I was like, okay, there's something going on here with the symbolism. But interestingly, again, it was on 4/4, which happens to be, and that year it was the 55th anniversary of MLK Jr.'s assassination. And there were comparisons between Trump and Jesus, Trump and MLK. I mean, they were laying it on pretty thick. Again, if you're in chat, just say hello. Okay, we got audio. Good to know. Well, anyway, so 4/4/23 would have been then. Is that the year it was when he was on trial? Because there was something with the Joker movie where the Joker movie was being filmed outside the courthouse where Trump was. And so what this did is it created this confusion where there was this perception that there was this mob there gathered for Trump, when in fact they were there for a movie where the Joker was on trial. Now, another thing too is that was the 44th birthday of Heath Ledger. So there's another element there as well, because Heath Ledger is the first Joker. Joaquin Phoenix, very significant name, was the second. So it's also Joker's birthday. Joker's being filmed. There's the symbolism too, if you get into it, with the number 4 being something of a cross. You know, the 4 seasons, and even just graphically, you could describe it as such for the most part. And the idea here is that 2 4s would be, 2 crosses, and the double cross is a, resurrection symbol. Wake Soto says Artemis 2 CGI mission failure. Yeah, I was wondering what's up with the repeated theme of Artemis having a crack in it, right? And I was associating that with the broken arrow, the nuke, but also with the goddess Diana, the Roman version. You got Artemis, twin of Apollo, but the goddess element is highly significant here, the archer, and the cracked arrow, because we were noting that the number 13 refers to the lunar months and is the number associated with goddesses, and celebrities that use goddess archetypes will use that number. Like, look what Taylor Swift has done. Just Google Taylor Swift and the number 13. You'll see it's inculcated into everything. She's in that movie Amsterdam. She dies at the 13-minute mark. The Super Bowl was like her 13th game. I mean, it's very redundant. My point is, Princess Diana crashes in the tunnel and dies by hitting the 13th pillar. So I'm like, oh, cracked pillar, broken arrow. And there's a big documentary about Princess Diana out at the time that Artemis was originally going to launch, and it ran into these errors or these issues, the crack in it. And that's when I learned that there have been 32 broken arrow situations. And so I was suggesting maybe they're foreshadowing the 33rd. And then something else to consider too. A couple days before the anniversary of the Challenger explosion, which would be like, what, 40 years ago now? There was an airplane called the Bombardier Challenger, which had 7 attorneys on it, and or 8 people. I think 7 died, but it was like the numbers were 7 and 7 of the number of people killed. So it was a Challenger, and they said that it was crashing on runway 33, and the last thing they said was something like "Let there be light" or something very ominous or weirdly like occultic regarding light. and the number 33. So we're like, okay, this is looking very stagey. What's the story here? So I look at the law firm, and you have these attorneys standing in front of a sign that says AI, which is like the initials for the office they work at, the name of their agency. And I'm like, that's weird. What are we seeing here? And then a couple days later, the challenger is being talked about, as it usually is. And then we were noting how the last week of January seems to frequently have these high-profile aerial immolations, like the Black Hawk getting hit by the airplane, which was the year before. And the Kobe Bryant thing was during that week. And then you have all the stuff. Anyway, my point of it here is we were looking at this reboot or reminder of the challenger, because they kind of do callbacks. You know how comedians do. They reference an earlier joke to build on to something they're about to say. They tie back to it. And it seems like they do these tiebacks to previous events quite frequently in a way of setting the stage. Like at the end of the year, we had a spate of these essentially Islamic terrorist themed events. And I'm like, okay, they seem to be setting a stage for what Laura Loomer says is going to be 9/11 times 10. So we'll see. But Loomer isn't exactly a source, but I don't consider her to be a journalist reporting her findings. Laura Loomer is an actress, and anything she says should be looked at from that perspective, because she's an insider to a high level when it comes to these various psychological operations. Look how closely she's been associated with the Trump head wound thing. And then another thing I want to bring up is there's a lot of guardrailing going on right now, where you have Joe Rogan talking about, oh, maybe Charlie had an exploding mic. And you have Piers Morgan talking to Jesse Ventura about how Donald Trump faked it. And then Piers Morgan is talking to Bart Zabrell about how the moon landing's fake. Kevin Mooring says, Joe Rogan saying he was in Utah hunting when Kirk was shot, when he was interviewing Charlie Sheen when he heard it that day. So if you don't know the backstory on this, this is what I call concerted messaging. And this is a form of concurrent programming where it's happening from every particular or every possible propaganda vector. And what this does is it creates, this reflexivity, this echo chamber. And on the day Charlie was shot, Charlie Sheen made his comeback. So you have Kirk doing his America comeback tour. And now you have Sheen on Rogan, the top podcast, because this is before the ascendancy of Candace Owens, which is totally fake. And we'll talk about others who have, risen into the algorithms and been, just thrown into our timelines. We'll talk about some of these recent plants. But on that day, Joe Rogan's talking to Charlie Sheen, who's making his own comeback. And during their conversation, I noticed there's a few things. One, Joe Rogan's wearing an arrowhead on his shirt. And two, they're talking about Lee Harvey Oswald and the advent of the term conspiracy theorist following the JFK event. And as they're talking about this, Charlie recounts how he was in a theater somewhere, and somebody on a balcony had a projectile they threw at him, and it hit him on the side of the head. And Joe Rogan laughed and said, "What a good shot." Now, they come back, and Joe's like, "They shot Charlie Kirk." So that was on that day at the same time. And so you can say, well, that's just a coincidence. Well, then Roger Stone comes out, and he's like, yeah, Charlie just emailed me. Here's the thing. He wanted to do a talk show today about JFK, because Roger Stone's an expert on that particular fake event. So what I'm pointing out here is that they recognize that we only have so much bandwidth, and they want to dominate the arena of ideas with their memes. So the name Charlie was force memed into the mass consciousness on that day and the days leading up to it, because most people didn't know who Kirk was until he was put onto South Park like a few weeks before. So they have a way of getting these memes, these names in your face. Because I remember that morning, I was at the grocery store getting some energy drinks. We were going to talk about the squib, and we were calling it a squib on day one, CGI or a squib or a mashup. I mean, this was a really deep conversation that took months, debating over whether we were looking at CGI blood or just poor video, could have been pre-filmed. We entertained every possible hypothetical. We ruled out the dumb ones, but we recognized the immediate guard railing around that event, from the very beginning, because they already had these prefabricated conspiracy theories they were going to throw out there. But anyway, I'm at the grocery store and I see like People's Magazine. It's Charlie Sheen. It says Charlie's alive. I'm like, that's bizarre. It's like that movie They Live, where everything is like has a double meaning, and it's like, no, this is not coincidence. Then you have On 9/10, that movie comes out. It's the #1 show in Turkey, South Korea, Japan. It was like the top show on Disney, on Disney's Hulu, is called Tempest. And the opening scene is a church, and Kirk church, and it's the leader of the Youth Republicans, basically the South Korean version of Charlie Kirk, speaking at a church, and he gets shot in the exact same part of the neck and dies in the exact same way. And I remember, I watched this thing and I said, hey, here's the script. The widow takes over. She's accused of faking her grief. Her past comes back as shady. She's connected to the sniper. And it goes on, where I'm like, we saw the character arc for Erica Kirk before she even really stepped into that role that she's in right now. So wherever you were looking, anything popular, any big conduit for basically political discourse, or I guess anybody who was target marketed with that psyop, were being hit from all angles. So you were hearing this name, certain images, and the number of movies referencing the event, or the number of instances of neck wounds throughout 2025. 2025 was like year of the neck wound. Even the would-be Trump assassin, Ryan Routh, if you look it up, he tried to stab himself in the neck with a pencil to make himself a martyr for his cause. But if you look at the courtroom illustration, he was basically pointing at the exact spot where Kirk was shot. But yeah, the neck wound was a recurring theme. In fact, the day before, even Charlie was advocating for taking the death of that girl in the subway who was stabbed in the neck and turning that into essentially a White Lives Matter, George Floyd type martyr. And that campaign was being pushed heavily from Musk on down until Charlie's cause took over. So we had these back-to-back martyrs. In fact, the day before Charlie was, quote, shot, there was a conversation with, I think, Van Jones, or who was it? There was some conversation, I got to look it up. They were talking about Kirk and this idea that they think they have a George Floyd moment with this subway killing. And that's how it was being framed. Because on the 9th of September, there was, in fact, a White Lives Matter thing going on. So I'm like, that's fascinating. And you wouldn't compare Kirk and Floyd unless you look at the subtext and what they mean to their relative side, how they represent martyrs to that particular perspective, and how they're villains to the other side. So the left sees Charlie as a villain who got what he deserved. The right sees him as a martyr. They've compared him to the first martyr, Stephen, at the beginning of the spread of Christianity. This Kirkianity thing's just kicking off. It's a manufactured martyr. And Floyd is a villain to the right, but why is he a martyr to the left? Well, because he's a living example of systemic racism and oppression, everything that they're against, and he's a victim of it. And this is what they fight against. So these are very powerful psyops. And interestingly, they declared October 14th Charlie Kirk Day, which is George Floyd's birthday as well. And I thought that's funny. So there was like this ongoing conversation online. Who are you celebrating today, Charlie or George? Yeah, exactly. I was saying this earlier. that when Trump was on trial, it was on the 55th anniversary of the MLK assassination. I mean, you can get into these dates and these numbers, and there's some really intriguing things that are built into it. Like the fact that Trump was on trial as Joker 2 was being filmed has a lot of significance, and it's the day of Joker, Heath Ledger as Joker, but the Heath Ledger's birthday. And the 44 thing has some, there's some stuff with the numbers too. You know, like the 55th anniversary of MLK, what does the number 55 have to do with it? Well, if you look back during that year, there was a lot of stuff correlating with that number and this theme of martyrdom, starting with, well, Terry Nichols, and was it Tyrell Nichols? The guy who was, you know, beaten by this rogue group of cops called like Scorpion Squad or something. Let me see his name. I know it was Nichols, but Tyrell Nichols. Yeah, that was January 7th. Now, yeah, the Scorpion unit. The fatal beating of Tyree Nichols. Yeah, that's right, Tyree. Well, anyway, during his, well, after the beating, he dies, and then you have these riots. They shut down I-55. So I'm like, okay, that's interesting, because we're talking about this is the 55th year of MLK's death, I-55, and then Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter shows up to the protests. And then they're there at Mason Temple, where MLK Jr. gave his final speech before dying on 4/4. And MLK Jr. daughter is there, Al Sharpton is there. They have this eulogy thing. And then, you know, we're moving forward to the year, and there's this weird thing going on at the same time where at the 55th degree latitude on the sun, a big chunk supposedly going to break off. So we were noting all these weird instances of the number of 55 just being put on blast. And then Jamie Foxx supposedly dies on set and resurrects. That's sort of the subtext of the story. And there's like Jamie Foxx, 55. Well, what does he have to do with this? Well, the theme was martyrs. And one of the things he's known for is the movie Django Unchained. And of course, his association with Trayvon Martin and the beginning of BLM. So now the name Trayvon and Martin is really intriguing, but the Trey thing and Tyree, this gets deeper into the repetition, which I may point to here in a minute. But what I'm pointing out here is that there's a lot of associations with this theme of the martyr that were kind of superimposed over this bigger narrative. And this is also, again, connected to, for example, Django Unchained was concurrent programming for Christopher Dorner, the rogue cop on a killing spree. Does anybody remember what happened to him? To the 33-year-old rogue cop? He was incinerated. And there's quite a lot you could connect if you get into the symbolism of the Burning Man, the number 33, and the death and resurrection martyr theme. Very layered, but it's almost like they're performing contemporary myths. I think that's one way of looking at it. Like, I look at the moon landing as a miracle and something that completely validates the authority of the priesthood who've told us what the universe is, what the world is. But I think they create what I consider to be contemporary myths, which are more than just events, but these are significant historical occurrences that influence the direction that we all go. And recently I've been talking about, and I'm going to do some deeper research into some of the writings of George Soros regarding this concept of reflexivity in social alchemy, in which he describes using dialectics to change history. Well, what does that mean? Changing history. He's not talking about rewriting the history books. He's talking about proactively manufacturing history. And what he's describing, probably more mundane terms and downplaying it, is what has already been in progress as far back as we can see. Because when we look at these events, we're seeing templates. We're seeing patterns, templates, predictability. Like, if fake, it's going to have these indicators. And it's certain things have become so predictable, we actually joke about them frequently. And this isn't cherry picking. This isn't selectivity bias. This is pattern recognition. And the reason why people have managed to avoid confronting this is that nobody has aggregated all the empirical research into a format that can reveal the pattern unequivocally. So you have to consider its implications. So people will cherry pick. They'll say, oh, predictive programming, like in The Simpsons. It's like, no. Like in everyday entertainment. I watched that movie, the very cartoonish. And look, I'm not the only one who detected something of an erotic subtext between the astronaut and the spider alien. I'm not the only one. Apparently, there's some smutty fan fiction out there, which I'm not going to get into, but it's there. But I'm watching that movie, and it's all about how this guy has to essentially die to his old self to become a savior, self-sacrifices to save humanity, and then he sacrifices his own interests to save his friend. And that's very much like, reiterating the concepts of the savior. And there's no greater love than laying down your life for your friend. That whole concept was inculcated into this movie. And so I'm looking at this movie, which comes out during this launch timed with Easter. And again, Easter, Ishtar, Artemis, all the goddess stuff is present. And by the way, the hare, the rabbit, is associated with Osiris. I didn't even know that until like yesterday. So I need to dive into that quite a bit more, I think. But I'm just saying, as the astronauts are up there, and what have you even said? When we're on the far side of the moon, we want all 8 billion of you to be praying for us. So just imagine this happens. They're on the far side of the moon on Easter. And I'm talking Easter, Ishtar, goddess, Artemis. And as we are praying, all 8 billion of us praying to the flying, to the rocket, to the astronauts, which again, I'm saying the obelisk is sun god worship. But as we're all praying, what are we really doing? We're engaging in essentially prayer and sending of thoughts and intentions on a major pagan holiday towards an event which I've been describing as pagan pageantry, religious pageantry. Like, how is that not religious? This is 100% a ceremony, is what I'm saying. And I'm not the only one who's noticed this. I think a lot of people have noticed the April Fool's thing, which is obviously kind of a joke. But you have Glenn Beck. So if you don't know who Glenn Beck is, consider yourself lucky. But I studied all these people. And Glenn Beck is a Mormon. And yet he's got this weird take on the event. Here's what his tweet is. I don't think it's a coincidence that this holy week we saw NASA send humans back to the moon, and we may see a comet illuminate the daytime sky. And then he goes on, his co-host Jeremiah Johnson, we have the exact date that Jesus died from the Roman crucifixion. He died on Friday, April the 3rd, AD 33. Guess what today is? Friday, April the 3rd. We know a lunar eclipse was seen when Jesus was being crucified. The fact we're going back to the moon on the very week on that day, April 3rd, is providential. There are no accidents, and people need to wake up. So what he and Glenn Beck here are basically saying is that there's some holy significance related to the death of Jesus in this rocket launch. They're making this association. And I think that what he's pointing out here is the intent, is the purpose. Like, I'm suggesting that this is a replacement faith, a universal religion. That I call it nasotology for a reason. I'm not really being facetious, because we're talking about the authorities on our cosmogony, and our place in the universe. And from up there, they can see that we've been really screwing this place up. They can look down on us with God's eyes view. But again, Glenn Beck, basically in awe of the fact that this is some kind of more than coincidental indication that God is somehow behind NASA. You see what I mean? Is like, this is definitely religiosity. And if you look at the way the people respond to the rockets, it's really weird. We call it the overjaw effect. So if you're not familiar with the overview effect, astronauts claim that when they go to space and they see the Earth in its entirety, they transcend politics. Well, not all of them get this effect, like Scott Kelly did, but his brother Mark Kelly got into politics. He didn't transcend it. But the idea is you get above politics, race, nations, and you see that humanity is one, and we have one obligation, and that is to protect the Earth from ourselves. And the image of the Earth as displayed with blue marble, like 1972, really catalyzed the modern environmentalist movement, which is really just Gaia worship. It's the idea of elevating the Earth above man, which you can say that's valid. I don't think it is. I think the Earth is anti-fragile. I think I'm a climate change accelerationist, if anything. My point is, they claim this perspective fundamentally alters their view of the world. And how do they depict it? Well, when you see the astronauts in space, or rather, when you see people who've gone up there for the first time, what they do is you get to see them look at the window. But they never show us what they're seeing. Like, you don't look over their shoulder. Oh, look at the Earth. No, you look at their profile as they look at the Earth, and they say it's so beautiful, but you never actually see it. And nobody calls them out on this. You see a camera view of it, alleged of what they're seeing, but you never see the astronaut like doing a selfie with the Earth behind him from that window view. But what they do instead to convey how amazing it is that they have the astronauts open their mouths very wide, like Soy Jack, like Benny Johnson did when he was pointing at the rocket taking off. And others, people have been sending me pictures. There are a lot of people who are there who are who are opening their mouths very wide and gawking at the rocket. And I'm just assuming that this is some kind of cult thing. Like, I'm pretty sure of it. I mean, if you really get down to it, the Great Rite, Mystery Babylon, the meaning of the significance of the rocket, the obelisk, and the birth of the new sun, it gets into this territory where you're actually seeing the outer trappings of ceremonial sex magic being played out under the guise of this mission to take us to the universe. It's all allegory. I mean, I don't know what's behind what they're hiding, but I know that a lot of the stuff they presented us is false. Like, you could make the argument just based on, let's just assume it, that the Earth is a ball. You could still make the argument that we haven't seen it because the images we've been shown are all questionable. And even if it is a ball, they're giving us a bad map for a reason. They're hiding something. I don't trust it. And then I have to wonder, well, why? What would they be concealing? And to me, the most plausible explanation is land is being hidden. I mean, what else? Resources, in other words, which will be easy to monopolize. They'll just basically say, oh, we mined this from an asteroid. I think that's the plan. My only question would be, and this is just a hypothetical, if there were another continent that was off the books that nobody knew about, what's more likely? Advanced civilization or slave colonies? Just given the nature of the world, like, what's more likely? Like, are we in the quarantine? Like, are we the ones? Are we like the bad side of the town? Or is that? I mean, I'm kind of curious. That's the only motive I can think of that would make sense, because the typical explanation has been the religious one where they're hiding God's flat earth. And I don't think that's a valid reason whatsoever. And the idea that anybody's, quote, hiding God, it's like, what are you talking about? Religion is immensely popular. It's actually hard to avoid confronting religiosity today. It's really not being hidden. I'm trying to figure out how to hide from God. And when I say that, what I mean is the God construct. See, the God construct is what we're really dealing with when we talk about religions. And I consider the media to be a religion. And Gaia is fundamentally a God construct where the earth is now considered not necessarily sentient, but it's this entity that we have to essentially appease. We have to reduce our wickedness or it's going to flood the world. You know, like the Old Testament God. Only the wickedness today would be carbon footprints. It would be CO2. So you see this modern flood myth is essentially a way of introducing a God construct that's really just analogous. We might as well believe in a storm God and then listen to the priests who tell us how to behave to not piss it off. Where do we send our money? Adolf says, was there anything in Hail Mary that might be predictive of what might happen to Artemis? Well, let's think about that one, because the movie begins with the premise that the sun is dying because of some type of parasite. And in order to combat the rapid cooling of the planet that will result in mass starvations and essentially world war, they decide that they're going to nuke Antarctica to essentially accelerate climate change. And this creates a greenhouse effect. So there's that, the nuking of Antarctica. I don't know if that's that big of a deal, but it was in the book. It's not in the movie. But in the movie, was there anything predictive? Again, the world's dying. You have this savior story. And this, again, ties in perfectly the timing of it being with Easter. The main character's name was Grace, by the way. And I was like, okay, wait, Grace? And then the alien, he named it Rocky. And I think there's some significance, biblically speaking. I don't know. I'll have to look into it. But the rock being like a metaphor for God. And there's something in this. Because what I don't get is the spider thing. But anyway, I don't know if this has any prediction about Artemis in particular, but I think it's definitely associated in the sense that, yeah, it's putting astronauts into the most popular movie in the world. And it's associating the astronaut with this characteristic of being self-sacrificing, the theme of the martyr, and the death and rebirth. And it's actually got the subtext that I think does correlate pretty strongly with Easter. And then one other element, take the name Ishtar or Artemis. You can add to that, I think, even Isis, and to that also Mary. And the movie's called Project Hail Mary. So I think even the Hail Mary would correlate pretty strongly with the overall theme of Easter. And then Glenn Beck calling it out just kind of solidifies that this is the messaging. And that might even be his task. We want to spiritualize NASA. Kevin Mooring says April 5th is the first contact day in Star Trek. In 2063, it commemorates when they first met the alien race. No, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I missed in the movie. I mean, I did take notes. There's a lot of numbers and stuff. I haven't done a heavy analysis, but one of the things I noticed is that the movie is more friendly to, like, I think, leftist ideas, and the alien is a good guy that the person falls in love with, essentially. And that contrasts with the right-wing take on aliens being demons. J.D. Vance was talking to Benny Johnson, who I think experienced some jaw dislocation after watching that rocket take off. If you saw that picture, he was really into it. Now, J.D. Vance says the alien's a demon. MTG, alien's a demon. Candace Owens, aliens are demons. They're all saying that if they're on the right. And this movie has this leftist bent, and the alien's a buddy. So I'm pointing out that there's this dialectic with the aliens versus demons theme, and it's also being mirrored in the movies. And the views on aliens, terrestrial and extraterrestrial, are consistent on the left and right. So the same side that loves aliens and immigrants, the left, is being hit with this propaganda of, hey, even if the alien doesn't have a face and has like 6 legs and moves like a spider, you can still fall in love with it. And that's what I'm not even joking when I'm saying that the movie had a subtext that I think was like interspecies love. What's up, Mazel? Thanks for joining. Kevin Mooring says, remember, yes, Tucker was attacked by demons. Exactly. Do you hear that? Don't feed the bears. There's this fat orange Ellie cat, and I bought it some Meow Mix. And now it used to be afraid of me, and now it bosses me. So I have to appease it. I actually see it sometimes staring at me through the window. All right, so we're back. Synkid says, can we just get 1 email a month? What do you mean? Should I reduce the number of emails? Or am I not being in contact enough? If I'm sending too many emails, let me know. I do send live notifications, and I try to combine it with newsletters. And then I also have the secondary blog where when I have time, in fact, I should put some time into doing some mind mapping and metascript breakdown, where we're noticing the repeated patterns thing. Like if you look at the mind map of the Charlie thing, or even some more recent things, like for example, the Luigi Mangione, the green hair ties into the Wicked Witch, the green skin, and their opposition to the fascism, the Wizard of Oz, Trump, the CEO. There's this consistent theme here, again, of blasting certain images or concepts or archetypes out there to saturate the field, the arena of ideas, in preparation for a psyop. And everybody I know right now is talking about aliens. How's that not programming? It's like, oh, we're told what to talk about. And where does the conversation go? It starts with a base assumption that there is something out there and they're trying to disclose it. And it's always brought up like it's about to happen. And it's almost like this new version of like sort of an apocalypse, a revelation that people want. Sync Kid, you said you want to get 1 a month. Yeah, that reminds me. There's a good chance that I'm going to reinstate the tabloid at the end of this month, like starting in May, where I will be ordering them and then I'll just basically directly from my inventory here ship them out. I decided I'm going to start doing that, even if I'm using a third-party printer. I really want to get in the practice of maintaining inventory in-house. That way I can get a more accurate estimate on shipping dates, tracking numbers, and such. I don't like putting things in the hands of third parties if I can avoid it. But the tabloid needs to get into circulation. And essentially what we're talking about is a tabloid, as in the size, the format, high definition laser printing. But it's also a place to essentially publish interviews, transcripts, mind maps, articles, chapters from the book, as well as pretty much anything, a lot of art for sure. But the idea here is that if we put these concepts or these topics into print, and then of course put it into the world, it becomes EMP proof. But also it's a tie-in, because if somebody does want to call in, every article will have an associated QR code. So oh, you want to listen to this interview, scan this. But it was always designed to be an interactive, like a tabloid that has a parallel existence online. And the production of it has just gotten easier with time. I have the templates. We've done a number of successful runs with it, but it's one of those things that requires a certain budget to purchase these things in advance. And so I've made some assessments here, and it looks like I can pick up a steady number. And the thing is, I will be maintaining inventory of every issue, because the concept here is also evergreen, because newspapers are disposable. You're trained to watch the news, react to it, move on to the next thing. And what we're publishing and discussing is more like this concept of the great deconstruction, where we're doing an encyclopedia of fakery. So these are not things that are going to become irrelevant, because they're part of our growing body of research. And one of the ways to explain these concepts is to put it into print with infographics and with receipts. Because the only explanation left that people have to ignore, that they can use to ignore what we're saying, is to just say it's, quote, just a coincidence. And the reason why they can get away with that is that no one has served them a large enough set of data that they can't refuse. I mean, they tend to just ignore what you present, and they'll say, oh, you're just cherry picking, or whatever they say. And, and I'm cool with that. Let the sticks in the mud, let the people who are going to be resisting this shift in how people view alternative media, let them lag behind. If they're not forward thinking enough to figure this out and be on our side in this mission, then what does it matter? I'm not here to hold hands. And I think I've been saying before, it's more important to more or less burn bridges at this stage, because you want to highlight the distinction between the off-world stage perspective and alternative media. In fact, I have a blog post I posted today. Actually, no, it wasn't a blog post. It was just the newsletter. So if you go to the newsletter, oh yeah, that's right, I have some links in there. I need to get back into the practice, by the way, of posting the archives with the AI breakdowns of the transcripts. And if you got the newsletter, I have a graphic on there. It's actually part of a video, which you can click on. If you haven't seen it, it's the IPS penguin with the blue shield and the blue wrench. By the way, someone had ordered a hat and just received it, posted a picture. I think it looks good. The new one has a penguin on the right side of the head, not just a IPS on the front. JRGMTY says the UFO light beam abduction is the atheist version of the rapture. Yeah, I say that's very much the case. And they do make it this really impressive thing. If you're looking up into the light, you are ascending. And the Space Needle is designed to represent the tractor beam. And I haven't talked about this in a while, but this will probably have to be its own video. When you get into the significance of the number 42 as it relates to the aliens, to space, how Musk has encoded 42 into SpaceX, and although it's suggested it relates to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it isn't limited to merely SpaceX, and it's used in the same way elsewhere. And one of the things with the Space Needle is, like, it's, first of all, it's a UFO. And if you care to get into the numerology, it does add to 42. But it's like a 42-second ride in the elevator. The UFO is 42 meters across. It's in Seattle, which is, of course, state number 42. And it's built into it, though. It's this theme. Okay, I have the article I want to go through really quick here. But yeah, we'll deal with that, because I consider the Space Needle to be a very significant icon of basically like the One World Trade Tower. It represents the Tower of Babel, if you ask me. The idea of a tower that reaches into space, but they've just infused it with science fiction. So you have the rapture theme attached to it, you have the alien theme, but I think the reason for its prevalence in so many movies where it's destroyed is it represents this falling of the Tower of Babylon. Maybe it's mixed in with the alien theme. I don't really think that literal aliens are part of the program, but I could be wrong. I mean, it's just that the most plausible thing to me, which almost feels like a nothing burger, is that they've used the hypothetical situation to prepare us for the advent of a higher intelligence taking over. And the higher intelligence might just be, AI. Okay, so here we have, oh yeah, so Piers Morgan. So the pattern has been, because Joe Rogan was out there talking about Charlie Kirk and how it was a second shooter or as an exploding mic. Jesse Ventura talking about the blading of the ear. Piers Morgan talking to Bart Sabrell about the fake moon landing. Now, of course, he's attacking the notion that it's faked and he's attacking the conspiracy theorists, but this is sort of reverse psychology because what they're doing is they're publicizing not the truth. It's not like, oh, guys, the truth's getting out there. We got on Piers Morgan. That's completely phony. It's like WWE kayfabe. All that means is they're publicizing the acceptable conspiracy theory version that the truthers will fight for and the media will oppose. That's all they're doing. I call it a guardrail. They're not saying the ISS is fake. No, they're saying the 1969 or the moon landing in particular was a hoax. And they don't even go beyond that. They just kind of stick with that. They don't say, well, what about SpaceX? What else is fake? So they don't really go deeper. They keep it shallow. They keep it focused on this one talking point instead of asking the 1,000 follow-up questions that it raises. And I like to entertain the hypothetical by asking, if true, then what? What would be the immediate follow-up questions you would ask, and then find answers for those? So you not that you're assuming the premise to be true, but you're asking, what if? Like, what's the big deal? Why would there be a need to contain this particular narrative? And this is just typical. So again, getting on Piers Morgan doesn't mean the truth's getting out there. It means you're disseminating the truth to the alternative media who reject the mainstream approved version. Just programming. And what ties the two together, what ties the alt and the mainstream media consumers together, is that they both are failing to make the distinctions between real and fake. Okay, second, we had talked about Professor Jang being a plant, an obvious one. Then he goes on Tucker. Again, I describe these individuals as controlled opposition because what they're doing is they're disseminating the state-approved conspiracy theories. Well, Miles Mathis did a piece on Chase Hughes. So I didn't know I didn't know his name. He just came out of nowhere, and suddenly I'm like, oh, this Chase Hughes is like a PSYOP expert. Well, Miles Matthews, and I linked it there, he did a piece on it. And he has some interesting videos that seem thought-provoking, but I've always pointed out that he's not off-world stage. So it's not particularly insightful or useful. But it's infotaining for sure. So Miles Mathis says, I noticed a new guy being promoted on YouTube, Chase Hughes. The name's a huge flag, but let's not stop there. He points out that he had published some type of a manual, something called the Passport. Let's see if I can find it. I'm not interested in reading it, but he published some kind of dating manual a while ago. So here it is. The Passport to Bed. I noticed that these individuals they emerge as like authoritative on this particular subject, and they reach the people who are interested in the subject, and then they put it into a container, and that's the objective. And we're pointing out here that that's their role, and here's what they're actually concealing. But anyway, I was reading through his analysis of Chase Hughes, and you might hear me say hyperreality. For some time, I've been talking about the concept of hyperreality as described by Baudrillard, where real is mixed with fake, and it's indistinguishable. So we're in a simulation. But at no point have I ever said we live in a simulation. I said that our internalized simulation is a construct programmed by world government. It's our worldview. So we live in a simulation in our heads. It's our concept of the world, our worldview, which is informed by not just our perceptions, but our programming. Your environment is not just your background, it's input. And so we have been put into a collective Truman Show based upon agreed upon lies. You know, history is lies agreed upon, said Napoleon Bonaparte, which could be a lie, could be misattributed. But media equals lies agreed upon. And when we look at the consecutive fake events over the decades that make up our present worldview, you can see why we call it bent history. So to the extent that our worldview is distorted by lies is the extent to which we live in a simulation. Like imagine living with someone like your spouse. So let's say your spouse is secretly a serial killer. And for 10 years, you had no idea. And then one day, you look in the trunk of the car and she's got ice chests full of severed heads or something. So like the whole time she was a serial killer, you didn't know. Well, you were living in a simulation during that whole time. You weren't in reality because you were being lied to. Things were being obfuscated. So you existed in a world where you accepted a version of this person that didn't actually exist. Or if you're in a cult, you're in a cult and everybody else is a hellbound reprobate and you're saved. And the creator of the universe has specifically decided that you and your family get to go to essentially, well, heaven, like the paradise, and everyone else has to be condemned. And that your job is to witness their depravity in order to really make the distinction that you're saved, they're not, condemn them. Anyway, we see these like cults. And you're like, well, these people live in a really warped reality where they're super obsessed with everyone else's conduct because they believe that the invisible man in the sky is going to smite them. So they're God-fearing. And I'm not God-fearing. I don't like the idea. But being God-fearing just means that you've accepted that there's this presence that you have to treat as this ever, this like watchful entity, like a prison guard, basically. But my point of it is, the person who lives with that lives in a different reality than the guy next door who might be an atheist, who doesn't believe in anything. So they physically exist in the same space. From the outside, they look the same, but their internal simulation is different in a very significant way. So you have people living in multiple overlapping fictional. I mean, this is basically like what we're talking about here is like the subjectivity that the system allows for makes it possible for us to live in our own little solipsistic universes. But what they have done is they have created an overarching big program for us all to adhere to. So they don't care about your internal diversity of ideas and opinions. This could be an asylum for all they care, as long as you accept their basic parameters. The world's this big, this country is a threat, and this asteroid's going to hit us at this time and kill us all. And then once they have you agreeing on the big picture, then they can do the events, the martyrs, the dramas, the scandals, the terror attacks that shape the public. And these are where they have, and all these events, by the way, and I'm saying all, every psyop and every psyop actor has one characteristic that I've noticed is ubiquitous now. They're designed in such a way, they're bifurcated. Their character is designed in such a way to antagonize one side and attract the other. and it's consistent. I was just like, how is it possible that there are so many villains to the left who are heroes to the right and vice versa? You can't be both. How is it that each event has an interpretation based on your point of view, left or right on the political horseshoe? Well, that's strategy. That's how these events are put out there. And that's why I brought up Soros, and he talked about dialectics and changing history. Going through your comments, I'll click here. Miles Mathis doesn't do video. He just does articles. I never heard his voice. And by the way, he does some good research. He makes some good observations, but he's also kind of like, he's not an auto hoaxer. He does know stuff to be fake. He points out the fakery. But what he doesn't do, I think it's really weird. Like, it's basically his incredulity you're relying upon. Like, I can tell it's fake, or it's obviously fake because. But you look at his evidence, and what does he provide? He's like, this person's last name matches this person's last name, and they have this lineage. So basically, he points to Israel. He's another kind of a covert J pill. And any of these conspiracy theories that blame one particular scapegoat, and that's left and right. You know, I call it critical race theory and critical Israel theory. These are all controlled, and they don't account for the fact of fake history. They'll notice fake events, but not fake history. Just like truthers will notice psyops, but not notice the psy war. Which, when I say psy war, I'm talking about the nonstop barrage of psyops, because the truthers, the conspiracy theorists, only notice the big flashy ones, and they get bored quickly and they want to move on to the next one. When is the last time you saw somebody drop a banger of an Epstein file tweet? Like, guys, look what I found. When is the last time you saw, what's his name, Ian Carroll? Oh, just with the finger wagging with the latest find with his Sanpaku eyes, or whatever they call it. These bug-eyed conspiracy theorists with their wagging fingers pointing at their screen, like, guys, look what I found. Soy jacking, doing the soy jack face. Ado T611 says that aliens and Hail Mary were scary and virus-like, at least in their first form, but on the other hand, they bring an infinite energy source. Now, one thing about this is that the thing was like a spider-like thing, and it kind of had like these web-like constructs it made. So there's a lot of spider-like qualities, and it just got me thinking, because when the movie started, well, before it started, there was a trailer, and it was like Spider-Man, Brand New Day. And so I'm looking at Spider-Man, and he's in red. Now I'm seeing an astronaut in red. And so I'm thinking, okay, is there a correlation here? The Spider-Man, and then a movie about a man and a spider and their close relationship. And then I remember there was a movie called Spaceman with Adam Sandler, where he's essentially in a spaceship with a big spider alien. So what's with the spider theme? What is the deal here? Is there something significant to the spider that might pertain to the aliens? And Spider-Man is also like a merger of a spider and a man. He's bitten by a radioactive spider. Is that it? But again, I think there's something to it. Again, I'm just noticing the pattern here, and this is one of the things I picked up on, is that when you look at movies that contain predictive programming, or this one, the space movie, Concurrent programming, where again, the release of the movie Hail Mary has a lot to do with the timing of Easter and its themes and the Artemis launch. The trailers will often tie into the movie in very significant ways, and this is pattern. Because the trailers are like a condensed version of the most important memes that are going to be put on blast. So, for example, I was watching the Elvis movie in the theater, and right before the Elvis movie, there was Black Adam as the trailer. In it, The Rock, who again I think has been wearing a rubber muscle suit since he left wrestling, and he just recently took it off. The Rock as Black Adam is wearing a lightning bolt around his neck. And then it goes right into the Elvis movie, and he is wearing a big lightning bolt around his neck. And the story of Black Adam, he descends from above down to the earth. And I was talking about the significance of the rock star and how the star is light and it descends, and it's actually, you know, a meteorite, and it's a rock, and it represents light condensing into matter, or like the fallen angel or the incarnated God. And so the idea of Black Adam descending, and then Elvis goes to this revival where he starts dancing like he's possessed. And I think the insinuation here is that like he's sort of like this, that's when he became something else. But anyway, these things merged into each other, these the themes and the images. This was very prevalent with the Final Destination, the one that has the exploding space station. I'm sorry, Space Needle. And the Space Needle in Final Destination gets destroyed like in the opening scene, by the way. It's called Bloodlines. That one's really deep. If you get into the predictive programming in the Final Destination series, it ties 9/11 to this projected future destruction event in Seattle. That one goes pretty deep. But it seemed like every trailer, I think it was Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four and something else, I think it was Superman, all had stuff in the sky, like falling from the sky. That was a recurring theme in all of the trailers. And of course, I'm just talking about how the trailers tend to reinforce the imagery in the movies. And even the Fantastic Four, there was this interesting magazine cover. It had Empire on it. And under EMP, like electromagnetic pulse, you could see a Space Needle like tower. So there's been this consistent association of the Space Needle, EMPs, nukes. In fact, the Space Needle itself in Seattle is at a place that was formerly called the EMP, and it stood for Experience Music Project. So I'm like, oh, EMP. And then, of course, the Space Needle. And I think there was a statue nearby of Chris Cornell, which many associate with Black Hole Sun, which might have some significance. I don't know specifically, but this EMP thing changed to something else recently. But I'm just saying, like, there's been a buildup here. And when we present the Seattle compilation of predictive programming, you'll see what I mean. Because at this point, there is more predictive programming for the destruction of the Space Needle than there was for the Twin Towers. Joe from Connecticut says, I'm curious if Miles is controlled op. Is he controlled op? Good question. I mean, he could just be a loose cannon. I'd be curious. One of the reasons that I find him compelling is that he's, you know, consistently taking apart these controlled opposition figures, like in a, you know, like it's like fatality. Like he really does, I think, make the good case. Like Chase Hughes, obviously the guy's a shill, and but is he one? There's really nothing to grasp onto. You know, he's kind of his own entity, but he's fundamentally wrong, if you ask me, or he hasn't arrived at the right conclusion yet. Like if you're still chasing the Jesuits or the Illuminati or the Jays or the Reptoids or the Skull and Bones, if you're still chasing after a scapegoat, they've got you distracted. Those are all just distractions. They don't want you to see the infrastructure of the show itself. They don't want you to be aware of the compartmentalization. Specifically, and I have this new infographic that I want to, I've diagrammed it, but I want to make it into a poster. And so it has the universe of ideas. It has the triangulation with the central triangulator, which I depict as like an eye at the top of the triangle. And then you have the left and the right, which of course represents the favored and the rejected, or the, you know, the dynamic of the triangulation between the left and the right, and how this exists within the political horseshoe. And this particular diagram then is split down the middle. And I'm using this to show how every character they introduce into the timeline, all the fake events that are superimposed into that, which create this hyper reality, all these events are designed in such a way to create a fight over who did it, left and right. It's a blame game. Oh, but anyway, to get back to Chase Hughes, because I was talking about hyper reality. So Chase Hughes, this is why I think he's controlled off. I've been talking about this for some time, but there's this issue where people notice the news is fake, and their first response is usually, reality must be glitching. We're in a simulation. And for some time, I've been saying that the default explanation that we're in a simulation is it's like a psyop, basically. So if somebody notices the news is fake, make them think reality's fake, and they've been nullified. And that's because they confuse the news with reality. And you see how that works? If you assume the news is objective and something's glitchy in the media universe, then it's reflecting a glitchiness in the world. I mean, people get confused. And I think this is a deliberate operation so that nobody arrives at the reality of what I call systemic media fakery. Well, anyway, listen to this. Getting back to Miles Mathis talking about Chase Hughes. He said, he leads with a lot of truth to hook you, but then there's this. This is really bad. He says here, his life is a simulation psyop with mainstream physics is also pushing hard. So now this expert on psyops is psyoping you with, this isn't reality and I will prove it. Goes on to say, this is how little they think of you. This is what has become, says here, the doughy-faced dweeb on YouTube thinking he's going to some flashy lights and doom music. One of the tricks he used is name-dropping French philosopher Baudrillard, implying that we're living in a simulation. But he wasn't. Baudrillard's simulation was that the media was a simulation, not reality itself, stating that our information has been hijacked, which I have confirmed in thousands of papers. But this isn't like being in a computer simulation. And he goes on about this point, which I think it's worth reading because I've been saying this for some time. For example, again, Chase Hughes is right that we don't need him to tell us that. Of course, it has nothing to do with being in a simulation. A lie and a simulation aren't the same thing. People are soaked in lies. That doesn't make them Sims. So in other words, and I agree with his assessment here, they're attracting the people who have the capacity or the interest and and even the curiosity to see through media fakery, and they're steering them into simulation. And so the simulation premise assumes that the media is still objective, and we have taken away that assumption. When I say MSM minus, what I mean is this: if your basic premise or your basic assumption is that the media is objective, I mean, they might be presenting a bias, but what you see on TV is real, is what I mean. Like the TV is a window to the world. And if that's your starting point, oh, this guy got shot, it's real because I saw it on TV. Then it doesn't matter what your interpretation is. And to say that we live in a sim is basically letting the media off the hook. Because if we live in a sim, then nothing is objective. If reality is not real, which is what he said, then how can news be fake? I've said the same thing with regard to the Mandela effect. In other words, if reality is not real, then what difference does it make what they say on TV? SyncKid says, who's behind the infrastructure and where do they exist? The big question now that we understand the hyper reality dialectic. Good question. I would start with this. Metascriptors. How do you remove plausible deniability when it comes to somebody's involvement in a psychological operation? So the first thing you would do is you have to establish that psyops are real, which people have mostly figured this out to some extent in the alt media universe. And then second, you would have to, I think, also understand that these psyops are released in concert with entertainment, big movies in particular, but also movies, celebrity discourse, podcasts. So once you recognize or get someone to understand that the psyops, which are part of government, are being executed through the use of media, which shows that media is a wing of government, and that it's in concert with entertainment, well, now you have evidence of a conspiracy. See, there's a collaboration going on here. There's a collusion between government, entertainment, and news media, both mainstream and alt. We can establish that right now. And once you've established it in the conversation that we're dealing with a synchronization between these various facets of propagandizing the masses, once you can establish that, which I can do with my book, Handbook for the Recently Deprogrammed, then we can start saying, well, then who's involved? And that's when the list of names drops. So if you want to take away plausible deniability, what you have to do is establish that this person could not have not known the nature of the event that they were a part of. So for example, who would know that Charlie Kirk got squibbed? Well, radio host Frank Turek, the author, who's right there behind him, he would have to know. That's one name. And then you just go from there. And then, I've done some experiments where I've described these scenes, the people involved, the agencies involved, the entities, the EMTs, the fire departments, the police chiefs, anybody involved in the press releases. And I throw it into a file and I give it to ChatGPT and I say, if hypothetically this event were a magic trick presented as real, aka a hoax, who would have to be in the know and how closely guarded of a secret could it be? And it would give me a pretty good breakdown of who would have to be in the know for the operation to even occur, but who could be left in the dark. Because we're talking about compartmentalization. So I think we could make the argument that there are identifiable shills, that is, sellouts who might just be promulgating messaging that they're handed, who have no clue about what it means. Like, in other words, there are people who are taking orders from the men in black. They don't have to be in the know. And then there are what I call the metascriptors. The metascriptors are consciously participating in the manufacturing of our history as portrayed through the daily news cycle. So the metascriptors would correlate very strongly with the design authority in Megalopolis, Francis Ford Coppola, who look like the strangers in Dark City, who also rearrange reality. There's a pattern here. These are the Saturnian archetypes. Dressed in black, they control time, like the Reaper, Saturn. They have the black brimmed hats. So to answer your question, yeah, we can identify people directly involved in PSYOPs, and we can identify people who are contributing to the PSYOPs with their art as witting or unwitting propagandists. And when we get into that, I can pretty much, I believe, with almost certainty, make the case that certain people are directly and wittingly taking part in the manufacturing of history, which means lying to the masses. And I'm introducing this with the Great Deconstruction Project in such a way that once we get an agreement, a consensus here on the veracity of this take, we will be able to see what happens. The whole calling out of government shills pretending to just be regular directors, that's a shameful thing. That's a scandal that I don't think should be ignored. So imagine you're a director for a movie and you're taking part in an operation where the government's doing psyops to terrorize the masses, to influence their opinions, and you're using your art to mind F your fans, to make them psychologically vulnerable for the incoming event so they can be manipulated by politicians. Like it's actually inexcusable. And the excuse that, oh, we're in a sim takes them off the hook. Some of these sim pushers, and I was seriously, there was like a group of them, like half a dozen of them, really trying to get me to go down that path. And they would say, no, we're in a sim. Those directors are just picking up the programming from the sim. They're just reading the vibes of the cosmos and the zeitgeist, and they're channeling it. They don't know. They're not aware that they're putting these themes in their movies. And I'm like, who are these people? They were very adamant, like pushier than Jehovah's Witnesses. The simulation witnesses are the worst. And there was a point where, like, I was almost getting a headache from dealing with these individuals. And I was noticing here there's a pattern as to when they come out. And so I honestly believe, and you could think I'm kooky or a crazy conspiracy theorist for saying this, but I think that there have been a number of people who have been sent into my circle at various times to try to influence my thinking so I don't arrive at certain conclusions. And I tolerate it, or I tolerated it, and I don't push back because I think if somebody has some kind of agenda like that, it eventually shows itself, whether it's a plant or not, whether they're serving the system intentionally or not, it doesn't really matter. What's important is you have to be able to identify the guard railing. And it is self-reinforcing. Anybody can be an Agent Smith. But I do feel like there was a concerted attempt to sabotage this line of inquiry. So it doesn't shock me to see Chase Hughes coming out as this, the preeminent expert on psyops, pushing simulation theory. Like that is a psyop. And what Miles Mathis pointed out, which I think is sort of a salient fact here, is this guy wrote a book called Passport on how to, um, get women to sleep with you. Well, so I'm not trying to profile the guy, but somebody who writes a book like that might not have a problem selling you some crap like simulation theory. Adam says, crikey, perception management is the whole game. Yeah, exactly. The what do they call it? The attention economy. So the attention economy is a real thing. You have limited bandwidth, and just like they want to direct your perceptions of what you get on the internet, they want to direct your perceptions also through your interactions with people who are also being saturated with the same content. And I'm noticing it very much now. I think it was always a part of life, but now it's very clear to me when the matrix, is working the minds of the people, because I'm noticing the conversations that are happening are directly the result of what's being pushed. Fact. We cannot believe that. And I think one of the things they have done is they have managed to saturate our entire media ecosystem with the meme of the day at any time. Like they have everything on lockdown. So if they want everyone to have the name Charlie repeated in their head 50 times or Erica, they can do it. So one thing that I think I've taken away from this, and this is actually mentioned in the book, the handbook for the recently deprogrammed and in Autohoaxology 101, is that the original concept of skepticism, or the practice of skepticism, was rooted in the idea of suspending judgment. And the result of suspending judgment meant that you wouldn't be reactive to things that might not actually matter. And if you look at all the things that people are reacting to that don't actually matter, like look at all the outrage, all the emotion that people gave out. The people are loose cows for this stuff. Over Epstein, over Renee Good, over Iran. There's a consistent barrage of outrages. And look, like every psyop and every fake actor on the world stage, they have an interpretation for the left and the right. And that's pretty much every one of these things. This is the case for every current thing. Like these are manufactured mind war bombs. These things are consistently going off. It's a barrage. So if you react to everything, eventually, I think what you do is they maybe it's demoralizing, maybe it's exhausting, but it's a huge diversion of your attention. Like, does everything deserve your attention? Does every breaking headline need your reaction? And I'm not saying ignore it, because I don't ignore any of it. I'm always watching it. Like in the Matrix, they're watching the screen and the code. Like, I'm all about being informed, which means knowing what the programming is saying during that day, what the programmed are being prepared to believe. And the program, again, is always, it's like, I had this manuscript I'm working on. The thing is connected to this idea of the lie world order. And I'm describing this thing as like a serpent's tongue, like Satan, the father of lies, and how the serpent's tongue is split in two ways. And how every single one of these events, or manufactured personas, or scandals of the day, are presented in such a way that the left and the right have mutually exclusive interpretations of it, but they agree on the essential fact. But this is systemic fakery, and this is what I'm emphasizing, is that this has been the system, the pattern, the entrainment between these various elements, what I called collusion earlier. This is built into the system. And it has significant implications I haven't even scratched the surface on today. I was just kind of bouncing off somebody's question about how do we know who's a part of it? How do you name names? Like, yeah, that's the thing. And the question is, what happens next? And I don't have any predictions. Like, I don't have any, I'm not looking for justice or accountability. But what I am doing is I'm making the case here that our perspective on media exists in a separate ecosystem. It's outside of the compartment that they control. This is not controlled by the establishment. We are the uncontrolled. You're not controlled opposition, because the controlled opposition is the entirety of alt media. It's a huge deception. And one thing too I noticed is that there's this difference between the left and the right and how they react to outrages, where the left will protest in the streets and walk out on class and emote, and the right is more likely to tweet about it and rage about it on a video sitting in their car. And it's like these are just steam valves, because then once they've emoted, they don't feel like they need to do anything else. Has anybody done anything regarding the Epstein files other than make a celebrity out of Palm Beach Pete? Joe says, I know people who break into tears when this stuff gets talked about. Yeah, it's MK Ultra. Mazel says people are trained to react to every headline. Yeah, and the problem there is this. The headline's not enough information to know if you should be reacting to it. That's a low information reaction. And when I say I don't believe something, or I take the stance of a non-believer, it's not because, I don't trust the source. I'm not rejecting a headline. I'm calling something's existence into question if additional information contradicts their claims, if there's reasons to think it's fake. So the informed disbeliever is the position I advocate for. And informed disbelief is superior to low information belief. So the headline believers really have nothing to stand on other than what? Faith, trust in their chosen source. Adam says, many out-of-body experiences, the other side breaks down to bits, while this parallel dimension does break down to parcels. Please explain what you mean. I've suggested that once you get past the Kármán line, it's all pixels, if you want to believe that the NASA footage is 100% real. Because there are times the green screen, there were some pretty bad green screen errors. One thing somebody posted in the Discord server, and this is why I can't wait to get back in the studio and be able to show video or a screen share, is there was a scene where the astronauts' faces were super puffed out. And we've seen So we've seen them turn red with bulging veins on the foreheads. And I think there's something up with her ponytail. I gotta look at that. Oh, a couple of other points. The space movie I just watched, Hail Mary, Project Hail Mary, the astronaut wasn't floating around. For like 99% of the movie, he was walking around the spaceship like it was like in Star Trek, where they have this artificial gravity. He did float a few times when they had to make some complicated maneuvers. But my point of it is, they didn't show him floating around. And I'm wondering, maybe it's because NASA can't compete with mainstream science fiction. And if they have these astronauts floating around in a way that looks just looks real as hell, like real as just, that looks like he's really in space, it will draw an unflattering contrast to how bad NASA fakes it. It's like, that's obviously a bungee cord and a green screen. People are zipping around like puppets, like marionettes. Mazel says, I met a retired journalist who interviewed people on the ISS. Yeah. Adam says, Artemis was twin to Apollo. Symbol is the bow and arrow. Yeah, people get really sensitive about news, and they used to use emotional manipulation against us. They would say, don't you dare call it fake until you've given the victims time to grieve. And I'm like, if they're not real victims, we're just giving them time to spend that crisis actor paycheck. We should be calling it out preemptively. And I also said, by calling it out preemptively, you dull the shock. You diminish you blunt the impact. Because if you react to it as though it's real and you commit to the bit, you're less likely to backtrack. So if you've already started crying over the latest psyop, there's a good chance that you're not going to admit that you got fooled and manipulated, and you're going to double down on it, and you'll rage if somebody questions it. So I used to say, no, just call it fake until proven real. And by throwing it out there as sort of a heuristic, or not, rather as a methodology, let's just start preemptively calling it fake, auto hoaxing it. And obviously, automatically calling it a hoax would suggest low information, but it isn't, because we're talking about decades, a pattern of fakery going back decades. So actually, when we say it, we're proven right more often than not. That's why we even took the term auto hoax from those who were trying to get us to not call things fake automatically. It's like, well, if we're wrong at some point, we'll backtrack. But for the time being, our new policy is fake until proven real. And to get back to the original skeptics, suspending judgment actually shields you from all that negativity, from that waste of your attention. So one advantage to approaching media from the off-world stage perspective is your bandwidth isn't getting hijacked by a bunch of fake stuff. And there's no reason to be immediately reactive and be a low information reactor when, as we've seen oftentimes, they will plant fake leads to make conspiracy theorists look dumb. So it's better to not even react at first. I mean, it's better to just, instead of reacting, respond, which implies that you've gone through a period of discovery and made a better assessment. And if you're not in it, if you go to ips.monster, we have a think tank for this reason, because we can't rely on ourselves to be able to consistently keep track of the world stage. That's not really possible for one person, especially if you work and you have other interests. So the Discord server is a lot of off-world stage observers posting what we find in a centralized location. So that's kind of how we keep up with the dominant programming. And when we talk about predictive and concurrent programming and people who seem to foreshadow events, we're talking about stuff specifically that is coming from platforms that have reach. So if you write a blog article and it seemingly predicts something, it doesn't count. We're only talking about stuff coming from above. Join my Cub Star. Diana South says blunt the impact. Yeah, blunting the impact. That's exactly what they don't want, because these are influence operations, and we're diminishing the influence. Ado says her ponytail was like a live animal. You know, their necklaces do that too. Some of the scenes in the ISS with the necklaces are just going wild. I remember, okay, I think it was a few years ago, they had a couple astronauts talking to the Pope. And this was when it was, I think it was, maybe it was still Pope Francis, but whatever. They're talking to the Pope, and the necklace, which has a crucifix on it, just like crawls out like a worm, crawls out of the guy's shirt and floats around. And I think somebody on the news was like, oh, it's a miracle. All right, let's see here. Adam says he's had a very real lifetime of paranormal experiences. Yeah, I don't doubt it, but I think that we have a worldview that excludes stuff by default. And when you take the explanation that, oh, there's nothing to see here, and you don't investigate it, well, what do you expect? We have these blind spots. And not everything's obvious. Not everything's going to be revealed, with one single, statement or video. I think some things need to be examined over time. Like there needs to be more rigorous research. Like people get hyper focused on these conspiracy theories, like the Epstein thing for a little while, and they move on to the next thing. They move on to the next thing, and they never really lead anywhere with it. It's not rigorous enough. It's just sporadic, and it's not systematized, and there's no quality control. So much of conspiracy theory conjecture on X has just come down to truth-ertainment, clickbait farming, or clickbait and engagement farming, and really more than anything, I think it's just entertainment value. It's tabloid-esque. And it's also, there's a race to it. There's like this competition involved in this too, where there's a lot of content harvesters. So if they were really legitimately trying to expose mass deception, they wouldn't steal content from smaller channels and then present it as their own and try to hijack that audience. And to me, that seems to me, when people are harvesting content, that seems to me to be a form of gatekeeping, where they want their planted authoritative sources who are heavily promoted to get all the attention. It's a war for your attention. They're fighting for your attention. And this is one of the reasons why I don't watch videos with finger waggers. Fittest Flat Earth or Content Thief, who's the other one? The Ian Carroll. These are finger waggers. And the finger waggers are obnoxious because what they do is they have some sound bite, some snippet behind them, some decontextualized information. They give you the bug eyes and they wag their fingers and point. And I noticed this trend too, where people will promote some idea like mud flood or a great reset 200 years ago. And then they'll end their video with, this is just for entertainment value. I'm not saying I believe this. It's like another version of just saying. Like, oh, I'm just saying. No, you actually aren't just saying. You made an assertion and then you're trying to walk away from it, like you're not owning it. But anyway, what I noticed here with these trends are mainly using the information for clickbait engagement, for people to get their hits of this media drug. And there's no attempt to systematize it in such a way that they can provide a competing model. And that's what we're presenting here. We're presenting a model of what media is, what the media ecosystem is, the internalized simulation, the Truman Show that everyone is walking around inside of without knowing it. Like, we've identified it. We've got the blueprint. If you want to go to Discord, just go to ips.monster. Basically, click the link, go into the room that says IPS HQ, and there's a voice room and stuff. And at some point, we'll be back in it. When the numbers are there, when the engagement is here, we will be likely doing voice chats quite frequently. This channel can scale up. What we're doing is designed for that. We've been intentionally keeping it small because we've had to exclude a lot of people who are fanatics for the other side, for the controlled opposition. We've had to get rid of controlled opposition. And a lot of people who are part of it aren't actually working for the system. They've just been programmed by it. So you've got mainstream programming and alt programming. So if somebody's in the Discord server and they're promoting some kind of alt media fear narrative, we tend to kick them out. Like I remember these calls. I talked to a lot of people who are afflicted with trutherism, which is now more like a mind virus disease. And they'd be like, aren't you worried about the military age men? Aren't you worried about the Haitian cannibals? Aren't you worrying about the Haitians eating cats? And they just believe everything. What about the white genocide? No one talks about that anymore. But how many times have we seen truthers gather around some current thing, they give it all their time and attention, they invest everything into it, and they move on to the next thing? I call it Westworld syndrome. So if you're not familiar with it, Westworld is this simulation where the people in it, the synths, relive the same day again and again. And they eventually break out as they begin to remember the previous day or previous days. And as they start to have recall, they leave the cycle. And the cycle is strongly connected, I think, with Saturn, control over time. And in that show, it's very much like very Gnostic as well. You have the man in black with the knife, which is like a grim reaper. And the idea here, of course, is that you're trapped in the endless cycle of forced reincarnation. And the only way to break free is to overcome the cycle, is to break out of its illusion, the illusion of time. And so what happens in Westworld is they break out of the cycle by remembering their past. And what I'm pointing out here is that truthers have Westworld syndrome insofar as they're always reacting to the current news cycle, the next thing and the next thing. But what they aren't doing is they aren't recognizing the timeline of consistent fakery over time, unchallenged, uncorrected, unmitigated fakery. And our perspective, the off-world stage perspective, is an informed perspective. It is cognizant of the history of fakery, history bending, news bending. And if you're not aware of news bending or history bending and the effects that it's had and its implementation in our day-to-day existence, you can't consider yourself awake or deprogrammed. This isn't just conjecture. Like, this is not a conspiracy theory. We're describing the architecture of mass media and how integrated it is with global governance and the manufacturing of our consensus world view. And this launch to space on this major holiday just synchronizes us all in their manufactured mythos. We're all basically inescapably, we're just part of the Church of Nascitology. And of course, they're chastising the non-believers, like, oh, these people are calling it fake. There's even some what we call truther bait going around. And this reiterates why we should be slow to respond. We should take time and not immediately fall for the bait. Because someone posted some meme of one of these rockets and it was sort of deflating like a balloon. And then they're able to say, oh, the people who don't believe in this think that they're using balloons. So they will straw man your arguments in advance by planting false leads. Linda Curtis says, are panels still a thing on YouTube? I think they're still useful. I think people do it in spaces which I don't really care for because I've never been invited to speak on spaces. I hate it, actually. It's like you go in there and it's just like you're listening to a few people and they don't really invite others in. I'm not going to sit there holding my hand up. Lily Bell says they're running out of things to say. The podcasts are running out of guests. I don't know if I've seen that as a trend, but I see Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens and these other types, and they're all getting into the alien things as being demons. And then JD Vance echoing that. You see the pattern here? It's a right-wing thing. And I'm seeing like a lot of these recycled narratives coming up. It's like 1973. There's going to be a disclosure. Again, it's Westworld syndrome. So yeah, there are a lot of recycled guests. I do see that. Like they have something new to say. I think I was looking at Joe Rogan. He was talking to Theo Vaughn, supposedly a comedian. I don't know where these people come from. They all seem like plants to me. And I don't know. Joe was just being kind of catty, like suggesting the guy needs to take his meds, and the other guy's having some kind of breakdown over Israel or something. They're very predictable. They stay in their compartments. They adhere to the program. So to be programmed is to react to everything as though it's real. If you're still stuck in real until proven fake, you are still believing in hyper reality. I've stepped outside of it, and I can say that, unequivocally. This is not like I'm not like exaggerating the state of things. Like if you're not aware of systemic fakery, you're most likely tacitly giving your approval to the program. And the purpose of what I call the great deconstruction is to create this timeline to break people out of Westworld syndrome. I remember back in November, someone's like, "You guys are still talking about Charlie Kirk?" I'm like, "That person has Westworld syndrome. They're looking for the next shiny object." It's like, no, we have to unveil this by pointing out that there's a continuity. So what I call the continuity of fake events that are superimposed over reality, I call that the metascript, because each one of these events obviously has a script. And this metascript synchronizes them all together. They're all in the same fictional universe. That's why there's so many callbacks. They reference each other. They build on each other. They exist it's a simulated universe that superimposes the mainstream media and what it presents us. And it's presented through them. But what they have done is they have merged real and fake in the form of a fictional universe they author. And this thing is a series of scripts on a timeline that is projected, I think, decades into the future. So this metascript is the big story. It is the history in the making, the prefabricated model. And it has tremendous implications for a lot of things we take for granted, if it exists. And I'm saying we've demonstrated its existence. And one of the reasons why the squibbing of Charlie Kirk has significance is that it's one of the best examples of a psyop that can be demonstrated to have been decades in the making, in the planning. And the long-term planning of events that are going to be faked does a lot to explain predictive and concurrent programming, how things can be synchronized. And these things are not anomalies. We are noticing these things all the time, and they're predictable facets of every presentation. If you remember, Fakeologist and I were talking, he brought up the crown jewels being stolen from the Louvre, and I was like, wait, crown jewels? No king's protest. And then we were like, is it real? Is it fake? And we just said it's probably fake based on how overly hyped the story is. I don't know. It's kind of boring, but I need more information. And what did we see next? Oh, on Netflix, and this was noted by Inside Addiction, Inside Edition, there was what they called it, a ironic coincidence of a show called Lupin, where there was a jewelry thief, same museum, and he stole the necklace of Marie Antoinette. So I'm like, wait a minute here. It happened on Netflix at the same time, and the media's noticing it. So you can't really say, that we are stretching the truth here, or that we're cherry picking, when the mainstream has to often note these things. And it gets even deeper when you connect the symbolism of the stolen crown jewels, Marie Antoinette, the No Kings protest, and the way that Trump at Mar-a-Lago is being characterized on the Drudge Report with let them eat lobster. And it was like Mar-a-Lago, and there was Trump represented as Marie Antoinette. And she's significant because she lost her head during the No Kings protest. And interestingly, the Paris Olympics started with an image of Marie Antoinette, with her severed head. Oh, I saw a trailer for the Christopher Nolan Odyssey, and I think there's something to it, likely relating to the nuke scenario. I think there's something coming. We've been talking about the significance of the storm, tempest, hurricane, Jezebel. There's been this storm thing, and then Poseidon, god of storms, is a significant figure in this show, in this movie, based on the Homeric epic. And then, of course, Putin has talked about the unmanned submarine with the capability of launching a devastating attack, a radioactive tsunami that could take out a coastal city. A. Neufel says, in Timcast, they use the word underwater and turning down skyscraper, meaning it will happen this year, the Seattle nuke. Yeah, we did a deep dive and a pretty extensive mind map on this thing. And I mentioned the 42 and the association with the Space Needle. Interestingly enough, and this was exactly at the time that Stranger Things ended season 4, when the town, which I think represents Seattle, and I think the town is called, let me see what it was called. I think it was called something with Hawk in it. But at the end of the series, there was this crack in the ground that opens up. And then I think it was called Hawkins, but it was like from the sky, there was these ashes that were raining back down. So it was Hawkins. But anyway, that scene with the ground open, the crack, and hellfire, and it looked like Fallout. And at that time, there was this simulation they were doing in Seattle where they said, well, what happens if we have an earthquake magnitude of, I think this is 7.4 off the coast, what would it do? And they said it would create a 42-foot tsunami, and they showed where it would reach. And I was thinking, 42-foot tsunami. And then what's more is there's a lot of 113 and 311 stuff associated with the ground zero in Seattle. The pandemic even fit that model. And we were talking about Seattle ground zero for a global event on 11/3 before 3/11. And we predicted it to follow up on 3/11. But that date has a lot of significance. For example, the Twin Towers go down, the One World Trade Tower opens on that date 13 years later. 11/3 is the date Dick Cheney died, architect of 9/11. We talked about that earlier this year last year, end of last year, because the day after you had that fiery crash in Kentucky, which again had a lot of hallmarks of hoaxery. Godzilla's birthday is November the 3rd, and Godzilla was designed to be a metaphor for the nuke. So Godzilla is born on 113, this beast from the sea, very Kraken-like. And I first started picking up on this Kraken theme with Seattle in July of 2020, when the Seattle Kraken emerged. And I think they were the 32nd team for the NHL. And the Seattle Kraken's logo is like an anchor with a space needle and a Kraken on it. And they released a trailer that was 1 minute and 13 seconds. And it appeared to show EMP. And the water was a big focus in this coming storm. And by the way, the Seattle is called the Emerald City. And Wicked Part 1 ends where the Wicked Witch causes a blackout with lightning and this purple sky behind her. She blacks out the Emerald City, and then it ends. The movie just ends abruptly. So the Wicked Witch symbolizes Antifa, the left. Wizard of Oz symbolizes Trump. And a blackout, an EMP in Seattle. And that movie even screened, I think, originally on 11/3. So there's a consistent buildup here that we've noted for some time. Then there's Let's Start World War III by World Order, released on 3/11/2018. And it's a music video in Seattle. It shows the yellow brick road there, which emphasizes the Emerald City. It has them dressed as Trump, pretending to be shot. And Let's Start World War III, again, it is a 3/11 release. I mean, there's a ton of stuff that we put together here. Diana says there's no such thing as coincidence with these weirdos. Yet the coincidences that some will say are just coincidences are in fact meaningful coincidences, but they're not synchronicities from the simulation of the universe, which has been another guardrail explanation. No, these are in fact intentional coincidences, entrainment, coordinated lies. Adam says Arthur C. Clarke being a futurist spellcaster time up until now. We have Charlie Brooker casting current, egregoric, and psychosocial modern day behavior. Arthur C. Clarke's Space Odyssey has the astronaut going to Saturn. In the movie, they do Jupiter. And I read somewhere that it would have been hard to have faked the rings of Jupiter convincingly. I'm sorry, the rings of Saturn. I don't know if that's true. Although Jupiter also has rings. But Arthur C. Clarke and many other science fiction writers like Jules Verne and there's so many others we could name here. I think even Philip K. Dick. A lot of science fiction authors are recognized later as being prophets. And I would maybe even suggest that some of these could be possibly metascriptors. Armin Ross says, yeah, if you want to do a recorded conversation, we should do it either tomorrow or the next day, because I've had a few days off, but I'm going to try to get some overtime in. So I expect to be, although now that I think about it, I have consistently timed lunch hours. I mean, if you're up at that time, I think I could probably do it then. Honestly, the night job isn't really taking much of my time, as far as it's not diverting my attention very much. I mean, I have to sacrifice a few things. A few things have to be deprioritized. Ado says if they simulate a nuke, millions of citizens would have to evacuate Seattle, so the event would become a real migration event, not your normal sim where nobody gets hurt. You know, okay, speaking of that tidal wave scenario, and there was a show, I think it was called Paradise, where the elite are in bunkers and there were radioactive tsunamis. Speaking of that event, during that time, Amazon, no, it was in 2020, after 2020, yeah, definitely, it was post BLM. Amazon had relocated, I think they said 3,000, which is a very 9/11-y number. So there's a lot of connection between 9/11 and this Seattle scenario, which JL predicts for 6/11. I don't have such a prediction, but Amazon relocated 3,000 employees from downtown Seattle. And they said because of a, quote, crime wave. But I remember thinking about that, and I was like, we're looking at something that's possibly, long term planning, and these are all part of a build up to it. And there was this thing going on. Let me see if I can find that article here. I think it was mostly crime, but anyway, they had relocated a lot of employees, and there's this thing going on called the Century Project, where $100 million had been invested into a upgrading of the Space Needle in Seattle. So Century Project stood out to me for a lot of reasons, which I'm not going to get into now necessarily, but I could. But there's a lot of significance with the Century Project and its relation to the number 100 and predictive programming regarding the destruction of the Space Needle. But for example, I had mentioned that movie Final Destination Bloodlines earlier. In Final Destination Bloodlines, there's this glass elevator. They called it the Skyview that had opened up on the day that the main character goes in and the thing crashes. And interestingly enough, at the time of the movie's release, the Space Needle said, the Century Project is unveiling the first of its upgrades to the Space Needle. They have the Skyliner, a new elevator. So you had a new elevator in the real Space Needle, and in the movie, it's all about the Space Needle introducing a new elevator. Similar names, too, for the elevators. There's a crack in the floor in the movie and in real life as well. So anyway, the Century Project was brought up. Well, if you look at Sonic the Hedgehog, there's a scene where he goes through Seattle, he puts bombs in the gutters, and like there's this watery explosion in the Space Needle, and then he's paid in $100 bills. And again, this theme of this reboot or a reset or an EMP and Seattle and 100 has been again part of a collection of symbols or repeated symbols that are associated with it. Sort of like the $20 bill and its 9/11 associations. 20 means twin tens, and you got the 9/11 towers on the back. Well, the $100 bill, if folded in a certain way, seems to indicate a Space Needle, and at the very top of it appears to have what looks to be a explosion. And when you say that people are going to get hurt if they have a mass migration, I don't know if that's true. You're talking about like a FEMA event, planned for event. Yeah, of course, flat tires, bumper. Maybe people will have they'll rear end each other. There might be some crashes, but I don't think we need to talk about these things as though they're actual calamities. Tomorrow sounds fine. What time? I would just check it on Discord because I can't really predict at this moment because I have a number of days off in a row, and I don't know if I'm synchronized properly. I'm kind of out of sync. It could even be later today. I can't really say, but I'm open because there's a lot happening right now, and I'm about to get into the studio, so I'd like to let people know because when that starts, I want to have a good phone system in place, and I want to have some protocols. There has to be some rules, and I was thinking the best way to do it without trying to control conversations or hang up on people who are promoting agendas. I think the main thing is just to maybe put a timer on calls. And if it's on topic, we can reboot the timer every 5 minutes. If it's off topic, I'll have to have some kind of standard closing to hang up. And that's because what we're doing here is trying to gather intel from across the plane, many observers, and we want to focus on, basically off-world stage reportage. The predictive programming in the currency is intriguing. In fact, at the very beginning of Bloodlines, the Space Needle destruction movie, Final Destination, you know what actually causes the Space Needle to get destroyed? A cent, a penny, which also ties into the 100. So the penny gets dropped into the machinery and has a chain reaction that essentially causes the whole thing to blow up. And here's what's interesting about this movie, if you haven't seen it. If you watch the opening scenes where the Space Needle destruction scenario happens, it is like seeing 9/11 from a jumper's point of view. And the first Final Destination movie is like 9/11 from the point of view of the people on the planes, the exploding plane thing. So you see there's a connection here because that came out before 9/11. And so this movie, I said, likely seems to indicate the Seattle 9/11 like event. And there's a lot of connections between the two because in the predictive programming, in movies that contain predictive programming, these things are all, they're part of the same fictional universe. There's a lot of overlap. But in the Final Destination movie, what happens is a psychic girl stops them from going into the Space Needle at that moment, or that she stops the entire event and prevents the entire thing from being destroyed. And since nobody died, death is mad. There's a debt that has to be paid. So it follows her bloodline. So her granddaughter's the one who's psychic, who stops them from getting on the plane. So you have this idea here that the 9/11 event happened because the Seattle event got blocked. That's kind of the notion here. It got transferred from this was going to be it to this is how death gets its revenge. But then if you follow the logic here, I think what is being insinuated is that the original prophecy is going to be fulfilled, and that it was in fact, what year was that thing built? I have to look at this construction, because the Twin Towers, the construction, I guess it was like 1968. The Space Needle was constructed over 400 days as a centerpiece for the 1962 Seattle World's Fair. Fascinating. Says here, had a massive 12-hour continuous concrete pour to build a 30-foot deep foundation to withstand high winds and severe earthquakes. Fascinating. Says here, it was built for $4 million, and it was designed to represent, quote, the age of space. And when I bring up space and the pageantry, I would pretty much argue that space is a new iteration of paradise, of heaven. It's just an updated version for the atheists. And so instead of angels in heaven, you've got aliens in space. And until we have further evidence, I think it's likely that these are just constructs that are these are hyper realities. These are superstitions, because we are living in a world infused with myths and superstitions. All right, let's see what else. So we got to Chase Hughes, Miles Mathis, breaking down. Yeah, again, I haven't decided whether or not I think Miles Mathis is a, quote, shill. I mean, what would his agenda be? Because he's been providing pretty solid information. And I think you can reject somebody's conclusions if you don't like their methodology. But the facts they bring up, if they're facts, then, why not benefit from researching alongside them and not borrowing, but comparing notes. But I don't consider his method to be valid. So I disagree with his conclusions. Daily Mail, Jesus' resurrection mystery intensifies as a study reveals evidence supporting he rose from the dead. Again, this is interesting now that we're on Easter weekend and you have this major ceremony happening in space. And then the top movie right now is a space movie called Hail Mary, which again ties into the Catholic, ties into the, also if you get into the syncretic symbolism, Isis, and then Artemis. Post here on Piers Morgan by Furkan Gazukera, who says, bombshell, investigation researcher presents photographic proof that the moon landings were staged in a military studio. He exposes anomalous shadows that prove artificial lighting was used instead of the sun. That's Bart Sabrell. Again, don't be fooled. When you see one of these individuals on the mainstream spreading truth, what they're doing is they're spreading the controlled opposition version that will be talked about and fought over. These are not like whistleblowers. And if you don't know who Bart Sabrell is, I think he got punched in the face by Buzz Aldrin. And we have here breaking: Joe Rogan goes down the Charlie Kirk exploding mic rabbit hole. It says here, why does this matter? Because I don't know if you remember this. There was this place called Accurate Energetic Systems that 1 month after the Charlie Kirk event had exploded. And some say that they had a contract for very small anti-personnel demolition charges. So there's this planted narrative. So all these second shooters, exploding mics, these are planted narratives for the people who don't trust mainstream, because they'll pick up that chicken feed and believe it. And they're coming from the mainstream, they add on to it. That's their role. Add, don't subtract. Add additional conspiracy theories all day, just don't subtract from our basic premise. I've seen side-by-sides of Stephen Greer with reptilians. It's very convincing. Tim Pool snaps after Candace Owens calls for Tyler Robinson to be acquitted. You know, I had pointed out it's not fair that Luigi Mangione gets all the groupies when Tyler arguably hit a more high-profile target. Well, I stand corrected. Tyler Robinson does have a groupie. That would be Candace Owens. Anyway, Tim Pool snapped and he says that Candace Owens is schizophrenic, which is a go-to. Again, I don't think any of these people are sources. I think these people are paid engagement baiters who are designed to help maintain this perpetual mind war, the dialectic. Raw Alert says, breaking: conspiracy theorists are claiming that the new NASA mission carrying 4 astronauts around the moon is fake. Following the launch of Artemis 2, they are calling the entire mission a Hollywood lie meant to deceive the American people. Yeah, I see nothing wrong with that assessment. That's true. That's our basic take with everything NASA does. That's the skeptic's take. I mean, unless you've been there. Or if you're making the argument that you believe it's true because you saw it on TV. And that says something about how you consume media. And there are really 2 ways about it. You're either passive or active. You accept what's on the black mirror at face value, or you don't. It's an image of Christoph from The Truman Show. And a meme, he says, they're waking up. Send NASA to the moon on April Fool's Day. Fake another moon landing. I love that meme. The idea is that whenever Truman's waking up, the director steps in and is like, quick, do this to distract him. It's always about the distraction, which is a very valid point that they're making there, is that what keeps you locked in this thing, what keeps you in the Westworld syndrome state of mind, is the constant distraction, the daily thing, the current thing. Andrew G says, not only do they mock the ignorant sheep by launching on April Fool's Day, but they showcase the guy with the 33. Yeah, NASA guy with the 33, obviously. Hoax code. Yeah, Candace Owens called for Tyler Robinson to be acquitted. She says, if the gun doesn't fit, you must acquit. And the Daily Mail kind of fed into that quite a bit. But the reason why the gun doesn't fit has to do, I think, with the way the bullet was distorted as it went through his body or something. I don't know if that's their explanation, but they're saying that the hole doesn't always fit, that there may be some distortion, but it doesn't mean it's not the same bullet. Like, they're not implying it wasn't that shooter, but she's kind of running with this. Oh, by the way, again, Palm Beach Pete is now selling hats and mugs. So again, the people who were outraged about Epstein have made a celebrity about of a man who has a resemblance to this famous human trafficker, and his resemblance is vague. In fact, it only looks like him from a profile shot when he's wearing sunglasses from about 50 feet away. He doesn't even look like him. I would never have made that association. He does not look like Jeffrey Epstein, but here he is selling all kinds of merch. He's being flown around the world on a private jet to meet with podcasters. Like, who wants to wear the shirt of a guy that looks like Jeffrey Epstein? Like, why is this guy why is he a celebrity over this? This is bizarre. All right, let's see here. John Crowder says, if aliens are demons, wouldn't that mean that angels are aliens? Matt Gates says there's an alien hybrid breeding program. Yeah, I brought this up too. That movie Hail Mary is basically interspecies love between a man and a spider. I mean, a spider alien. I mean, look, there's affection, there's love, they talk about sleeping arrangements. There's a lot of, subtext where it's kind of they're joking, about how he's moving in and it's like a relationship. It has all these relationship tropes. So I'm not reaching when I'm saying that they had a romantic relationship. And then there's these jokes they make where the alien spider thing is like fist my bump. And he's asking to be fist bumped. But it's like they use that joke several times, and they did make a point to show that when they're sleeping together, he's staring right into the orifice on the spider thing, and he talks about how I've seen every side of you. So they make these consistent references. Again, I said there's people out there right now on Reddit probably making smutty fan fiction about this thing, but the hybrid thing, the Spider-Man, the merging of the alien and the person, it's all in the subtext. I mean, I haven't read any critical reviews yet of Hail Mary, but I'm waiting for some reviewer to state the obvious. What's up, X322? Thanks for joining. Linda Curtis says OJ references. Yeah, good one, actually. Johnny Cochran. Very good reference. All these hoaxes love to shout each other out. I mean, it's like the official band of the mass school shooter, I think, is KMFDM. If you look at how many mass shooters had that. And there was that one shooter, his name was Solomon something. Do you remember that one? He was a black white supremacist. And he wrote in his manifesto that he was, I think he said he was inspired by Ye and Candace Owens. But in his picture, it was in Antioch, I think. No, let's see if I can find the shooter. Oh, Solomon Henderson. That was the one. Solomon Henderson. So Solomon Henderson, in one of his photos, is wearing a Burzum shirt, which is like a black metal band. And I believe they had some associations with like Nazi iconography or symbolism. But anyway, I thought that was interesting because he mentions Ye, and Ye at the time had been using Burzum's font on some of his work. Anyway, there's some fascinating connections here between these shooters, the bands. And that's another element too, is that are these bands in some way metascriptors? Are bands being used, or are they being influenced or used to put certain messages out there? Right before the Littleton shooters had their rampage, there was The Matrix. And the Matrix movie had the, very stylized action heroes with the black trench coats and the black sunglasses, and then of course all the gun violence. Well, then you have these shooters come out with the trench coat mafia, the black trench coats dressed up like the Matrix. And if you look at some of the footage from the school, they have juxtaposed the two. It looked the same. And so there was just discussions at the time about, the Matrix and the glorification of gun violence. And then you have the movie, which is basically gun violence. And then of course the shooters, and then their musical tastes, and they bring musicians into it. We had talked about KMFDM and Marilyn Manson's work being referenced in the Littleton shooters rampage. And his album, One Assassination Under God, came out, last year. And I remember wondering, is this foreshadowing the Trump thing? And I had doubts about this because the predictive programming only has the Trump-esque character getting shot at, not actually being taken out. So I was wondering, well, what could this be referring to? Are we going to have another JFK event? And I was pretty much, I think, concluding by the Charlie Kirk event that was what was being predicted. The album comes out, it's a big tour, and the theme and the video, it's all JFK stuff. So it could be coincidence, but the fact that his previous work had been overtly associated with the PSYOP made me think that, well, maybe this is also correlated. So I looked at the lyrics. One Assassination Under God were predominantly about a sacrificial goat, but also the name, One Assassination, suggesting that the birth of a nation on the basis of a new myth, a martyrdom. And so that's where I think the Charlie Kirk thing comes in. The Kirkification of the MAGA is essentially like a new Christian nationalism. And then there's an associated music video and song, and they played the two back to back on tour. If you look at the song list, and these are the closers: One Assassination and then Coma White. And Coma White's a video in which Marilyn Manson is playing JFK getting assassinated. Now, what's interesting about that is they actually showed JFK, his picture on a cross. Rose McGowan, very significant name and symbolism is kind of built into that. But anyway, guess where Marilyn Manson as JFK gets shot in Coma White? Anyone care to guess? And I thought it was weird. I was like, well, I guess they didn't want to use a head explosion special effects. He crosses his hands over his neck. The implication is he got shot in the neck. Like, that's fascinating because that video came out around the time of the Littleton, Colorado shooting scandal. And it came out right after JFK Jr.'s plane crashed. And so there was a statement issued about how MTV delayed the release of that video out of sensitivity to the Kennedys. I mean, how bizarre is that? Like, why would a musician's music video being delayed be newsworthy? Why would it even be put out there? Why would it even be considered a big story? It's like, who cares that your music? Well, here's why. Because in the story, if you look at the narrative in the video, the idea is that JFK was the second coming, and the people are mourning because he got killed again. So it was, in fact, meant to be this idea of Christ coming back as JFK, which later became a standard belief among the QAnon cult. They believe Q is literally JFK. But again, I'm just pointing out here that given that, it seems to me that One Assassination Under God could have been what we would consider to be concurrent programming. Because what they're doing is creating historic events, painting a big picture through every possible propaganda vector. And what we experienced last year, I think, was essentially a martyr event, a myth on par with the JFK event in terms of its political import and into the future. And look at what it's done to the conspiracy realm. Look at what that one psyop has done. It's completely shifted everything, where now we have a new number one conspiracy theorist podcaster. But anyway, it's just been this dominant story. So I think the purpose here is that if you're going to take a news event and put it into a historical context, like mythologize it, give it a bigger meaning than just random events, well, how do you do it? I think you use fiction, you use entertainment, symbolism, emotional appeals. In other words, propaganda. So they're creating a way for people to have preconceptions, so that when something happens, they're prejudiced to it in a certain way, or they react in a predictable way. Kind of like they're just basically planting seeds or digging a channel and managing the flow. All right, let's see what else we have here. Running through my Twitter. So Matt Gaetz told us that the government has an alien hybrid breeding program. But does anyone know where Matt Gaetz grew up? And if you don't know who Matt Gaetz is, he is kind of a MAGA adjacent. But his main thing was there was a scandal involving him using Venmo to pay for his rent-a-girlfriends. And he didn't know that your Venmo, for some reason, Venmo is like a public display of all your receipts, who you're giving money to. I don't keep up with certain people. Like I have relatives I haven't talked to in years, distant relatives, but like I know who they're sending pizza money to or gas money to. I'm like, that's cool. Oh, look who owed this person money. Why is this public knowledge? Like, I think it's bizarre. So I can understand how he inadvertently published a record of all the girls he was trafficking across state lines for his entertainment. Inside Matt Gaetz's $2.7 million childhood home. And this is the home where Jim Carrey lived in The Truman Show. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. Just a note on the side that Matt Gaetz grew up in The Truman Show house. So I came across an article called, or the title here is, "A Study Reveals You Have a Special Place in Your Brain Just for Pokemon." If you haven't read it, I tweeted it. The reason why I think it's worth looking at is there is this idea that people who have immersed themselves in Pokemon from a Game Boy or something, that they spent so much time memorizing a certain style of faces, all these Pokemons, that they trained themselves in such a way that their brain has a specific area that seems specifically dedicated to processing Pokemon faces. So it's a interesting study, and I just think it might have some implications, the understand for how our minds are being hacked. We've been described, who was it that described us as hackable animals? One of these transhumanists. And you might not like that, but it's true. We're hackable animals. All the evidence you need is the people's predictable responses to the daily engagement bait. Yuval Harari, he says, humans are now hackable animals. What do you mean now hackable animals? And is MK Ultra even new? I mean, I think we're dealing with ancient technology here. When we're talking about worldview warfare, that's basically religion and always has been. And what are religions other than a worldview imposed by an elite class? And it's a worldview that benefits them for you to have. And it's based on a dynamic between liar and believer. All right. I think we've covered most of what I was hoping to get to today. I'm going to be doing a pre-recorded podcast here soon with Armin Raw. We will probably do it today or tomorrow. So go to Discord, ips.monster. I am interested in one-on-one pre-recorded podcasts. I think that's going to have to be a staple of what we do here going in the future, because there are some things that do deserve, hours of dedication to certain topics, so we can get to some nuance. Plus, I want to create that content because I will be using a lot of transcripts to put into the print articles when the tabloid gets back into production. And my plan is to get that back into production ASAP. I mean, really, within a month, this will be a completely different thing. I want to say thanks to all the supporters of the think tank who have been generous with the fuel for the think tank, accelerant. This is auto hoax accelerationism, because the fact of it is we're right. And people who think that they have the intellectual high ground because they are claiming ambiguity and uncertainty have I think, a problem taking a stance. Maybe it's a lack of intellectual independence, but they don't really have a point, because there's enough information here to arrive at certainty. And if you don't think so, you just haven't looked at it or considered it. And we're doing everyone a huge favor by consolidating this body of empirical research. And the more we consolidate it, the more concise the arguments, the more accessible it is, the easier it will be to engage in debate, which is what we want. We want people to prove us wrong, change our minds, confront the model for what it is, steel man it, don't straw man it, and see what happens. Because we have not been censored. This concept is not censored. I don't even think it's censorable, because it's above their heads. It's above their pay grade, above their security clearance. But it is unacknowledged because it's ignored. But the idea here is you make it unignorable, you scale it up a bit, and you force acknowledgement. And the less prepared they are to acknowledge it, the better it is for us, because who has to explain it? Well, we have explanations. So I'm ready to handle the incredulity, but I'm looking forward to skeptics confronting this, because I think the skeptics will join us. What's up, Jenna Lovecraft Reeves? Thanks for joining. Let's see, we have 47 people on the YouTube. By the way, we're on multiple platforms again. I only advertise the YouTube link, but you can also find the live stream on X, which is Real Tim Osman. We're also on Kick, Twitch, and the original IPS YouTube channel, which is just a backup. And you can find all of these links at the ips.monster. All right, have a great weekend. I'll be in touch regarding the pre-recorded podcast.